My name is Sarah Reese, and I am doing a presentation on the 1997 Spring Creek flood in Fort Collins, Colorado. And the reason I chose this topic is because I was a student up at Colorado State in 1997. While I wasn't there during the actual flood, I was affected by it when the flood occurred and when I returned to school a few weeks later. So I thought it was an interesting topic to cover and to understand what went on behind that presentation, behind that disaster. So in this presentation, I am going to discuss the event, tell you how the event occurred, the key players and participants, the ICS roles that public health participants played, an assessment of participants' response, an evaluation of community preparedness, and the changes to the community following the flood. So I apologize for the busyness on this slide. However, I thought it was important to really set the stage on how this event occurred and how it made the perfect storm for the perfect 100-year type flood. Because a lot of factors kind of played into it and made it so that this flood occurred. So in the summer of '97, there were 6 weeks of really hot and dry weather. And then within a 30-hour period, there was 10 to 14 inches of rain that fell. So basically, hot, dry weather, a ton of rain in a short period of time is just the perfect situation to set up for a big flood. So on Sunday, July 27th, there was a strong cold front that had moved in with storms late on Sunday afternoon, and it dropped about 2 to 4 inches of rain on the west side of town. Throughout the night, there was still rain all night long. So by July 28th, there was already a good amount of rain that had fallen. And then in the evening of July 28th is really when it kind of all came together for this massive flood. So by 6 p.m., it was raining about 1 inch per hour. And then by 7 p.m., it had increased to about 3 inches per hour. Between 8:30 and 10 p.m., there was extreme rain that had with as much as 6 inches of rain that had fallen on the west side of town. So at 8:15, water was going up to about 2 feet deep on the major streets. By 9 p.m., the basement windows in many houses began exploding because the water in the window wells was getting just so much pressure. 9:30 p.m., Spring Creek, which is the little creek that runs through town, and in the most widest of areas, it's probably about 10 feet wide. So imagine how 30 feet of water outside of its banks is what was rolling through Fort Collins. So a massive amount of water at this point. At 10:24 p.m., the doors in the student center on CSU's campus just burst open. Too much water, too much pressure, a ton of water just busted in. At 10:45, the water begins soaking through a culvert that runs underneath the railroad berm, which is near the mobile home park. By 10:50, so basically within 5 minutes of that, the culvert just blows out, and the water level in the mobile home park raised about 5.5 feet in about 3 minutes. So absolute massive amount of water rolling through this mobile home park. Person I talked to, Mike Gavin, was a first responder from Poudre Fire Authority that was there that night. And as he described it, basically, this mobile home park is about 100 yards wide, so basically football field length. And there was about 100 mobile homes just floating through this area. So basically a big football field full of just mobile homes just floating along in the water. Right in that area, there was a gas leak that caused a liquor store to explode. So there was a fire as well. The train derailed. According to Mike Gavin, they told the train not to come through because of all the water. And the train said, no, we can clear it. And of course, the railroad tracks are broken. The train derailed. Big mess there. So 3 hours. So basically, all this went down between 8:30 and 10. So by 2:10 a.m., the final rescue takes place. So basically, for a very small community, it was about 8 hours of pure chaos initially with this emergency. This is kind of more of a pictorial version of what I just described, but just kind of gives you a better image. On the left side here, you've got Spring Creek that is coming down, and these are all field, basically, where the water was just rolling through out of the creek. Here's a big hill that it would have to clear where the railroad track is, and that's where the train derailed. But all the water comes up and over the railroad burn there. And this is your mobile home park right here. So basically it just rolled right through the mobile home park and took it out. And College Ave is one of the major thoroughfares through Fort Collins. And up here north of this whole area is Colorado State University. And so the Laurie Student Center and Morgan Library were the two buildings that took the biggest hit with all the water that went through. So a lot of water that rolled through. And one of the interesting things about this that kind of made it the perfect situation is that all this rain fell on the west side of town and very little rain fell on the east side of town. Fort Collins is not that big. So the fact that it was such an isolated event made for just kind of the perfect situation for a ton of water to build up and roll through a part of town. So just with all of that, we had 5 people were killed in this event. 4 of them lived in the mobile home and 1 lived just east of there. 54 were injured. There were 200 homes destroyed, 1,500 homes and businesses that were damaged, and over $200 million in property damage. At Colorado State University alone, greater than 40 buildings were damaged. As I said, one of the biggest areas that took the hit was Morgan Library, and what they were doing over that summer was doing some renovation in the library, so they moved a bunch of the books down in the basement, and so all of those books got damaged. And so then the total physical damage was over $100 million at CSU alone. So a picture says 1,000 words. So basically these are images that I captured on the internet, and I thought they were really powerful, just kind of give you an idea of what happened. So of course the fire is what's going on in the upper left corner here. This is one of our creek crossings here that clearly took out this bridge and jammed a bunch of stuff underneath it. The railroad track that got broken. And this is, I think, the student center here, all the water that's built up there. That's Morgan Library, so that's when they started doing the cleanup. And this is the student center as well, the bookstore on the other side. First responders that night. And then this is the basement of Morgan Library after they were able to get back down there. So just a total mess for a very small community, and just a lot of recovery to ensue after that. So key players and participants, there were a lot of people that played a role in the first response and then the recovery. Poudre Fire Authority was the fire department that was there that night that helped everybody. They were the first responders. They took care of trying to get everybody out. And then, of course, recovery. You're going to have various departments within Fort Collins. The state of Colorado was involved. Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, of course. FEMA then was involved, Salvation Army, Poudre School District, Colorado Department of Transportation, and the American Red Cross. So numerous people that were involved in both the recovery and the actual response. So the incident command system. So as I said, I talked to Mike Gavin from Poudre Fire Authority, and he outlined kind of how the ICS worked. And so what they did was they responded with a unified command. And what that is that there's a structure which the role of the incident commander is then shared by 2 or more individuals. And the idea behind that is when you have so many different agencies that are working on one emergency, it allows all these agencies with different responsibilities to then work together effectively. So there is a single coordinated incident action plan that they're all working on, but they have various incident commanders that are working together. And so then you could have all of these different key players that are responsible for their own personal areas. And then once the initial response piece was concluded, like the disaster response piece, then FEMA came in and played a huge role in the community recovery, which was really helpful in getting Fort Collins back on their feet. So when you talk about response and you assess the response that they had, really, I think when you're looking at a disaster like this, you have to look at the rapid response. What happened that night in those 12 to 14, 6 to 8 hours once this rain started to really fall? And then what happens afterwards? How did they recover and and get back on their feet. So with the rapid response, the rescuing people was the number one priority. They were trying to get people out of that mobile home primarily. As I said, there was a 3 to 4 foot wall of water that was rolling through this mobile home park. So it destroyed the roads and the homes along the way. I mean, absolutely took out the mobile home park. So the firefighters rescuing people that night pushed the envelope of safety, according to Mike Gavin. So they basically were just trying to, saving people was their priority. And, by doing that, they utilized any flotation devices they could get, boogie boards, boats, rafts, anything to get people out of that area. And with all of this, only five lives were lost. And as I said, 4 of them were within that mobile home park. So I think that's not too bad. And then the recovery response, there was so much that needed to be done once this happened. The cleanup was massive. There was so much debris and so many homes that needed to be fixed up, so much road rebuilding. I have to build the train tracks again, all of the water damage, and then dealing with what was in that water and what it's now, seeping into the walls, and how all the mold in the homes, the remediation of it all. It was a huge undertaking to get Fort Collins back on its feet. And then you also have to consider what they needed to do to make sure this didn't happen again. I mean, this was a crazy accident, just situation where you had a ton of rain that fell with a short period of time, but you just don't want that to happen again. So what could Fort Collins do to fix that in the future? So FEMA played a huge role in recovery response. The head of FEMA at the time, James Lee Witt, worked with the community, and his goal was to basically make it recover, and it has helped them recover quicker than they thought it was possible. And he had a initiative within FEMA called Project Impact. And the goal of Project Impact was to build it back better so this doesn't happen again. And he does this with 4 main goals. So you identify and recruit community partners, you determine community risk for natural disaster, you set priorities and target resources to reduce the impact of disaster, and then you also keep the community informed. So just working with the community partners in the community to try and rebuild and get the community back on their feet. So evaluation of the community preparedness, before this happened, I found a quote that basically said that the city's flood preparation and response offer valuable lessons for flood planners and demonstrate that pre-disaster mitigation activities can reduce the loss of lives and damage to property. And so he's referring to Fort Collins in Griggs et al. In 1999. This was written after the fact, but basically he was evaluating how Fort Collins was prepared for something like this, and because of their preparation, this emergency was much better than it could have been. So just setting up what they had done, by 1980s, Fort Collins had realized over the last 150 years, when the city was really starting to build up from its early stages, that it was in a bad area for flooding. And so it had done a lot of preparation to reduce any sort of impact downstream. So they organized what they called a stormwater utility. And so this included outreach programs, regulation of floodplain development, design criteria for structures within the floodplain, preparedness with warning activities, land acquisitions that were in bad areas for flooding, informational services, and drainage system maintenance. And so with all this preparation that they had done even early on, and then within the 20 years before the flood happened, they estimated that this resulted in approximately $2.8 to $5 million in savings, and then 98 lives saved. So they only lost 5 lives, and those 5 lives, granted, that is not ideal to lose anybody in this situation, but it could have been way worse if they hadn't been prepared over the years. And so looking at after this happened, while they had done a lot of good things, I also read a paper that where FEMA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, CSU, and the Cooperative Institute for Research in Atmosphere worked together, and they were analyzing kind of where the city failed, where the city could have been better in these situations. And one thing was looking at the lack of awareness or recognition of unfolding disasters. So basically they had no warning system in place to let them know that there was a really bad situation with the water west of town. And then problems with communication. So how do you, which, learning in this class, it's a touchy situation. How do you communicate and not do it where you want to freak everybody out, but also let everyone know that there's a situation that is of emergency. And so just trying to figure out the best way to communicate and make sure that everybody's aware that there's something going on and that they need to get out before emergency unfolds. So following the flood, what did the community do? There was a variety of things that they did to rebuild and make sure this doesn't happen again. And so they did a lot of capital improvements within the city. So they redesigned flood management programs. They drained ponds and streams and within the flood management corridors. They changed building locations that were near flood zones. They changed the flood zones. And looking at the response agencies, so specifically Poudre Fire Authority, they looked at their policies and the procedures, of course. They realized after this situation that their swift water rescue and their urban search and rescue training wasn't as good as it needed to be, so they improved that. They now have detailed flood warning systems, so they monitor the weather conditions and the stream flow, so they can tell how fast the stream is moving, and they understand if it's moving quicker than it needs to be. And then also, I thought this was really interesting, but Fort Collins assembled a community weather watcher. So it's the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow. I'm not going to even try and say the acronym, but nonetheless, it's a group of people throughout Fort Collins that, are just volunteers, and they watch the weather. And if they see something out of the ordinary, they notify the authorities so they can, see if it's something that they need to be worried about. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. And then they also improved the education to the public to be better prepared for flooding. So more community awareness, more disaster preparedness. With a situation like this and with many disasters that we have like this, people don't want to believe that there's actually an issue. They think, authorities are being a little bit excessive in warning them and getting them out too early, and then they don't want to leave. And so it's just trying to figure out how best to let the community know that there is a situation, they need to be worried about it, and this decision was not made lightly to tell them to evacuate. Also, I thought it was really interesting learning about this, but in 2003, Fort Collins was the first community in the country to be awarded a FEMA pre-disaster mitigation grant. And so the city of Fort Collins received $2.7 million to fund 5 flood control projects on Spring Creek. And then the city also contributed an additional $1.4 million to the project. And so what all this money did was it designed and constructed 4 detention storage facilities to reach peak flood flow, and then it also worked on the railroad embankment as well. So interestingly, my husband worked at the city of Fort Collins, and he knew all about this before I even looked into it, about how they put a lot of money into redesigning the floodplains and making it a safer community for people in the future. So that's all I have. These are my references. Mike Gavin is from the Office of Emergency Management Battalion, Chief of Poudre Fire Authority. And so he was kind of the main person that I got a lot of my information, and the rest of it was more supplemental. But having somebody that was there in the incident command system, that was the first responder, I felt that this was definitely invaluable to my presentation. So thank you for listening, and I hope that you have a nice day.